Hi, everyone. Welcome to another literacy focused, teaching focused edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be talking with author and educator Kristin Ziemke. Kristin, thank you for joining.
Jason, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here with you today.
Great to see you. I saw you a couple of months ago at a teaching conference in North Carolina, so glad to connect in Zoom as well.
Yes, that was such a fun conference. And I met so many fabulous educators from North Carolina. So a treat to spend time with you then, as well as today on Zoom.
Absolutely, absolutely. By means of a first question, please tell us a little bit about your background in education. How did you get into the world of teaching and researching?
Yes. So I am the product of two educators. And growing up, I remember sitting at the kitchen table and my mom and dad talking about their day. They were high school educators, their day at work. And I remember thinking, like, they're working so hard, like they're so tired. Who would want to do this job? And it's just my brother and I, and both of us were like, we're never going to do that. That's so difficult. Like, what is that job? But of course, there's something about teaching that calls you. And I think, it possibly is genetic. And so after exploring a couple other things in university, I went into the College of Education at the University of Missouri and ended up a educator. And my undergraduate is in early childhood education, which I absolutely love. And then my master's program is in instructional leadership. And, I think why I became a teacher is because I love learning and I am a very curious person. So always thinking about like what happened, like what's next, like how do we know that, like where did that information come from, was a very natural catalyst for me to enter the world of education and then to have the opportunity to continue to study and to research and to learn. So I was a very long time kindergarten and first grade teacher in Chicago public schools. Since then, I've moved on and I now support a network of schools called the Big Shoulders Fund, where I do teaching residency, and then I coach and provide professional development to educators in Chicago and Northwest Indiana. So it's been a wonderful way for me to continue to be in classrooms on a regular basis, as well as to get to coach and to get to offer professional learning for teachers as well.
Wonderful. Lots of balancing there and lots of areas for you to get your hands and creativity in with your expertise. I know that you're
Yes,
the author of Text and Tech, and I
correct.
also know that you're the co-author of Reading the World, which is the same theory behind the name of this show, Words, Images, and Worlds.
Exactly. And so when I found out about your show, I was so excited because we really do share that commonality where, we're looking at the greater complexity of not just literacy, but I think learning, right? We're learning from words, we're learning from images and visuals all around us, we're learning from others and the arts and interactions. And I think that's why I love literacy so much, is because it's constantly evolving and we hold on to some great things from the past. And then we look for new entry points to new modes of learning. And so I think that multimodal piece is super exciting, and I know you do as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know that there's debate, discussion around the screen versus the page, and what does this do for readers? What does this do for literacy? So, curious about how you envision these forces coming together for our students.
Yes, absolutely. A very long time ago, I was lucky enough to do some early work with Apple and to pilot iPad devices before they went to market. So there was no app store. They were no camera on them. They're just internet machines. And I remember looking at it and thinking, like, okay, so how will these change literacy? Like, how does it offer communication? And at that time, I was in first grade, and I saw how devices could capture a young person's story, and then they could use that recording as a way to be like their storyboard or their planner, right? Like when you sit down tomorrow, go back and listen to the story you told the device, and then use that to remember where you were in your story and to think about what comes next, right? And so, like, giving lots of ways for developing readers and writers access and power, right? For a young person to hear a recording of themselves, even if it was just an audio recording way back then, that gave so much credence to the fact that their story mattered and that their story was worthy of living in the world. And so I think it was our second book. My writing partner, Katie Mutaris, was the fifth grade teacher at my Chicago public school. But our second book was called Amplify Digital Teaching and Learning. And back in 2015, we said it's not about the technology, it's about how you use it that truly matters. And our advocacy at that time was for students to create, to make something, to capture their thinking, to show what they know, to connect with real authors and illustrators online, to connect with other students. And we saw that as a true power of what the devices could be. And we cautioned against letting these devices get out of control and not influenced by educators. So it was very clear back in 2015 that we were either going to let educators determine the path or run the risk of developers creating stuff that no one asked us if we needed. No one looked to students and said, what would make your learning better? And clearly, the path of developers really pushed curriculum, and kids, of course, were dollar signs. And now we're seeing the repercussions of that, where I was a very slow adopter of technology in my kindergarten and first grade classroom because there were always games online where kids could match an uppercase A with a lowercase a, and it would be masked as like a Space Invaders. And I saw young students working in isolation with headphones on, mindlessly clicking uppercase A, lowercase a, eyes glazed over, and the depth wasn't there. The engagement, the collaboration, the deep thinking wasn't there. And long ago, when we had two desktop computers in my classroom, I didn't want that for my students. And as we got new devices, I didn't want that. But when we had a tool like an early stage iPad where you could draw and write, where you could add audio, where they gave cameras, and then you really could make a movie about the book that you just read and recommend it to other 6 and 7 year olds. Like, those were game changers for me. And so I think for me, I'm still back at the same time that screen time is just time that needs to be active versus passive. And, I've obviously looked at the research out there and, of course, listened to Jonathan Haidt and his work. And the two big indicators that he signals we need to be wary of are, of course, social media and gaming. And the big pieces of that are because it's passive versus active, right? Like the mindless doom scrolling and, the ongoing likes, right? All of that becomes passive, right? And same with gaming, like you get to another level, but you're doing repetitive motions and trying to get more extrinsic motivation, whether it's like coins or points or the next world or this. And so I think, we really need to instead be looking at what are we doing with these devices that inspire active learning, that give depth versus breadth, and that engage young people to really see that like learning is joyful in itself, and that's enough. And you don't need to do it for a streak or for coins or for hearts. And I think the biggest thing that we have to look at and hold accountable for this are many of the assessment programs, right? I was in a kindergarten classroom this past year, and kindergarteners were getting rewarded for their streak, the number of days that they accessed their assessment platform. They're getting points for the number of tasks completed. And it's that concrete evidence that like this is exactly what the research is saying. It's not saying screen time is bad. It's not saying reading on a device is bad, but some of these bigger pieces. And then when we talk about reading on a device, in my new book, Text and Tech, the biggest piece of research that like rocked my world and said like yes, this is what we're talking about was this study from Ola Orsted and colleagues out of Norway that said across classrooms globally the biggest issue is that educators are not talking about the similarities and differences of reading in print and reading in screen. There are some parallels, but there are lots of differences. And of course, the first step to building knowledge and understanding is to build awareness, right? And so we need to make our young people of all ages aware that, like, here's how you read in print. This is similar when you read on the screen, but here are some big differences too. So that they can then monitor comprehension at a deep level. And so I look at it as we need the screens and we need instruction behind the screens because the one thing we know about literacy, 7,000 years plus of reading and writing in the world, there's always been change, and we can expect continued change. And, you look at the books, still one of the greatest tools of technology, like books aren't going away, but now we have access to audiobooks and different methods and modalities for entering. And so we know that change is going to keep happening. And so as educators, we're learners. And then we learn right alongside our students, which I think gives it that authenticity that's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much you said there that's wonderful. Just thinking in terms of critical awareness, those reflective and analytic questions as teachers, as students, but then those themes of authenticity and access that are so important
Mhm.
for any activity and any planning in the classroom.
Absolutely. And through your work, like huge celebrations of digital is access, right? Like now we can translate things. Now we can offer text to speech and all of these great joys. But we need to teach young people how to use it appropriately and effectively. And I think so often we over assume that they know what to do with devices because they've accessed devices before they've come to us and they are really good at um, gaming, finding cat videos, like doing some workarounds, but that doesn't mean they know how to use them as tools for thinking. And that's our responsibility. Like we have to be teaching, like, here's how you think on these tools, especially as we confront some of the new challenges with AI.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's more to technology than cat videos. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But sometimes we think like speed, like they're moving around the device
Hmm.
quickly and we're like, how are you doing that? We sometimes think that means knowledge, but that's really just being quick accessors.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned text and tech, and one of the things that I love about the book is that you have this list of contributors that are coming alongside you, this variety of authors and voices. So I'm curious about some of the themes that resonate there, but then also just celebrating that you're a person that brings other people in and
Mm.
showcases the work of other researchers and teachers.
Thank you. That's what I'm most proud about with Tex and Tech as well, is that it's really the story of a community of learners. And, like I'm lucky enough that I do get to travel some and speak with people in North Carolina, like when we met or at other conferences. And I've really just like, grasped this idea that so much of teaching and learning is about people sharing and say like this worked for me and my students, maybe it'll work for you and your students. And the more voices that you have contributing amplifies the experiences and the types of students so that someone absolutely has students like your students that can give you a word of wisdom and some confidence. But I think the beauty of it is that everybody's entering in different levels. And so you can really see the continuum of how people are evolving in their literacy practices and expanding the definition of literacy. one of my favorite stories is from kindergarten teacher Katie Kyer. And Katie talks so robustly about how her young learners use iPads to capture and to document. And so going back to the very old like Reggio Emilia principle of documentation, here she's empowering kids to document. And so when they create something with a block that system, right? Like they've built a castle and told a story about that, the thinking and learning doesn't have to stop at cleanup time. They can archive that, project it on a projector, and explain all of the elements of their story to their peers, right? So then you get that beautiful piece of reteaching. Or tomorrow they can translate it into a stapled together book that's a turnable story that they can then use. Or even tomorrow they can look at that creation that they made, recreate it, and add on to it. And so I look at like the beauty and the storytelling and the cognition and the retelling and the teaching that goes into kindergarten students just having something that they can then expand into a large surface and explain it to their peers. And I think every classroom can do some type of that, science experiments, math projects, manipulatives, whatever you want to do. That piece of documentation is just so huge. We have great stories from Anne Marie Corgill, who is a NCTE friend that you might know as well. She has a new book coming out just this month. But Anne Marie talks about using a document camera to enhance close reading of a piece of text or a novel. Like you talk about worlds, and if you look at a very highly complex picture book, maybe like David McCullough's Castles or something like that, the amount that you can read and identify and explain and inquire into when you use a document camera to put a big piece of text or an illustration on a screen really adds to the robustness of that discussion and what you might be able to talk about in a different stance. Or she talked a little bit in her section too about reading the book with her students. Oh gosh, which one was it? Let me think for just a quick second. Oh, The First State of Being, which was the National Book Award finalist and Newbery, a winner from last year. But that it goes back and forth between these two different worlds and how students could use the close-up of the text that was printed in the future to really understand the book in a whole different way. So I think it gives a lot of entry points, which I love. But I think seeing the deep thinking and the struggle that teachers go through, and then the aha they come about with, hopefully gives all of us more confidence that we could try, we could fail, we can struggle, and then come out with something that's really, really rewarding for our students. So I look at it almost as like getting a window into 22 teachers' brains and their stories and finding lots of different entry points. And I hope that it inspires others to see that it's not just Kristin and Jason, doing some of this like exciting digital work, but that's a whole community. And like together we can make strides that really showcase what teaching and learning can look like today and get away from those passive, low level practices of devising to get to really student creative connection, collaborative, deep thinking.
We're after in the first place, those deep connections and
Yeah.
awareness and building ideas.
Absolutely. And so many people are doing it so well. It's great to have as many voices as possible speaking on it.
Yeah. In your practice, what are you most excited to try out this new school year?
Great question. I'm super excited to go back and to take a couple of the new opportunities around multimodal learning into classrooms, and specifically, I think, into middle school classrooms. I spent the majority of my career in the early years, but maybe for the last 3 years, I've done two emergency teaching placements in middle school where I did ELA 1 year and then science and social studies last year in fifth through eighth grade. And so, really looking at the joy that comes out of multimodal learning, the opportunity for access when you say to middle schoolers, like, okay, I'm going to have you watch this video. First, I'm going to teach you like some quick principles of sketchnoting, right? And we're going
Mhm.
to use like shapes to draw and to document and to share with them. It's so important that we share the research, like y'all, I just found out 5 years ago that nonlinear note taking is a much more effective strategy for organizing your thinking than writing lines in a notebook. So let me show you some basic principles, right? Like here we start with a square and a circle. What could you use those to make? Add a couple labels or big ideas. Okay, now let's try it. And so we have the opportunity to watch a video, for example, and then sketchnote it and create these rich and robust like designs created by students that document their new learning. And it's in a way that makes sense to them. Then, because it makes sense to them, they're able to retain and reuse the information at a much higher level. So this becomes now part of their organizational process, sketchnoting, and we can put them on new tools for additional research, whether it be a Padlet of articles that I've created about a topic. Here are 4 articles. Choose two and then make a sketch note on the one that resonated the most with you. Or even having the opportunity to use a school safe AI tool like a school AI, where I can create a chatbot for seventh and eighth graders saying, here's a scenario. You're researching Antarctica. This research assistant is going to ask any of the remaining questions that you haven't already found research information on. Now add that to your notes and to your think sheets that you already have going, and then we'll do something kind of retro and old school, but super exciting if you've never done it before, like make a zine to teach others, right? And so we've done research in books, we've done research of articles online, we've used a little bit of AI and introduced how and when to use it effectively. We've done sketchnoting and drawing, and we've thrown some like Papermate flare pens out there, which every young person loves. And then we've invited kids to create a zine, which is a mini magazine that tells about what they've learned. So now they've created real magazines that can then live in the classroom library or the school library to inform others and signal to kids that they have purpose. So I was super excited about the many ways we did all of this kind of layered interaction around a topic and branching off and doing a little bit more with that. Because I taught these middle school students for maybe 3.5 months. And then there was a period where they did have a permanent teacher come in for the spring. And I went back to their graduation and they're all like, remember that time when we made the zines and did all that research? Like that was the best thing we did all year. It was like one little nugget, but it had a lot of significance. And so I think looking at the ways we can layer interaction is super exciting, especially for the kids that sometimes we treat as like older or like
Mhm.
grown up or give like more paper and pencil or just digital tasks too that are very, like fill in the blank, low entry point. So I'm super excited about that.
Well, cool. I saw you do this great activity. I think it was like a 30 seconds or 60 seconds, like quiet watching images activity.
Yeah.
I'm gonna definitely incorporate that this year. I'm teaching high school seniors, and
Oh,
I'm gonna try that out a few times just to emphasize that use of words and images and how powerful that is.
That's that's so amazing that you're going to incorporate that. I'm so grateful to hear that. But I've done this, like now for years with adults, with kids, and the power of images just really is astronomical. And in writing text and tech, I just found so many great research studies on how images cue, so much thinking in the brain, and it happens even before it gets to your brain in your optic nerve, and like we're wired to be thinking about images. And so like leveraging that works for something like 86% of the population are primarily cued through images. And so it's just a great resource to develop vocabulary, to help sequence, to really understand information. So be sure to let me know how that went with your seniors. I would love to follow up.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll be glad to. Uh, if I'm a teacher out there, this is coming out kind of at the beginning of the school year. To sum up
Yes.
many of the things that we've talked about, what are some things that I might be thinking about in terms of how you envision literacy instruction right now, and then where we might be
Mhm.
headed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now literacy instruction and a single word is layered, right? And I think figuring out what the best pathway for your students is to gain knowledge of who's in the room of your classroom. Excuse me. Um, Test data gives us one picture, but creating a quick Google form, what are 5 things you want me to know about you as a learner, right? Creating another Google form, like what are 10 things you'd like to know more about this year? And then finding resources, that the people in your room are interested in. Everyone's motivated to read something about a topic that they're curious about. And so now, with so many different ways to access articles online, to find great video content, or to even write short articles based on student interests using an AI tool, it's much easier to get topics based on interest in front of students. And so I think the more conversations we can have with young people, the more quick interest or feedback surveys we can do, the better we can know them as people, allows us to plan for their learning journey or assist better in their learning journey. And I think it's important that we recognize like some people, like me, will prefer reading text. Some people will prefer listening to something. Some people will prefer text with a video. Um, and there's no one way to go about being a reader or being a learner. And so, in many ways, I celebrate that we have so many more ways than we've had before. And I think it's maybe like the best time to be a learner because hopefully our young people can find something that they're interested in. I think for teachers starting the year, you don't have to do everything at once.
Mhm.
Like pick one thing, right? And I always say like do one thing a quarter. Like and maybe first quarter you're going to spend time getting to know your students. So maybe a once a week like Google survey on a topic of curiosity or what they thought about this book or here are 3 articles. Pick one that you would like to read, right? That element of choice is so important. And then the next quarter, maybe you incorporate some more videos, into your instruction. And I have to give a quick shout out to the website The Kid Should See This because it is 8,000 videos intended for learners to build curiosity and to promote thinking. And categorically, it's like my one-stop shop for when I need a video on some type of topic or something to spark conversation or even to spur writing. Watch this video, write about it for 5 minutes, right? It's my place to go. So just try one new thing a quarter, and then by the end of the year, you have 4 great things.
Slightly great advice. And any other resources that you'd like to share, including where we can find out more about your work?
Yes, absolutely. You can find out more about my work at kristinziemke.com. And one thing that I would suggest people visit if they're interested in learning more about text and tech or these practices that we're talking about is that on the website, There are maybe about 30 minutes of video where I'm talking through some of the big ideas in text and tech and going through by chapter. Here's what this chapter is about. Here's what I found in my research. Here's who's sharing their practice as other educators in this book, too. And so I know a lot of the schools that I've worked with in the past are using those to launch some professional development where they watch maybe 5 or 6 minutes of me talking and then talk about how they might be able to use some of those strategies in their practice. So I think that video piece is really helpful. And there's also additional resources from the book as well as from my other books on the website as well. And there is a contact form too. I always love hearing from educators and problem solving together or offering some ideas or hearing what other people are doing. Those I'm always trying to hear from others about what I could try to incorporate and include in my practice. So I'd love to hear from anyone who listens to your show.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I know that I'll follow up and share about the coming school year. Glad to have you back anytime. And as
Yes.
promised, did we miss anything that you want to make sure to include?
I am just so grateful, I think, in closing, for all that educators do every day for their students. I know this work is hard. I know we are constantly learning together. I know learning comes with struggle, but I hope as you start the school year, we can remember that learning is joyful and find that joy for ourselves and for our students. And Jason, just huge shout out to all the work that you do. I know it from your podcast. I know from your work with NCTE. Thank you for being a real cheerleader of educators and for continuing to always push the work forward.
Many thanks for the kind words, and certainly glad to have you back anytime. May the conversation continue.
Absolutely, please.